Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Sound Decisions here on Passion for Sound. And today marks the fourth and final part of my interview with Jason Stoddard from Schiit Audio. I hope you've enjoyed the first three parts. If you haven't seen all the others but want to, I'll put a link down below where you can jump to a playlist and watch all four parts at your leisure. In this episode, I asked Jason questions about things such as whether or not balanced or single-ended is inherently better than the other. I ask about whether there's a new Jotunheim on the horizon. And at the end, Jason even talks about how their local brewery, which is the beer that he's been drinking, and unfortunately he hasn't disclosed the name of that brewery, but he does talk about how the local brewery factors into their product design conversations and processes, which is quite fun to hear. To get things started though, if you've watched part 3, you may remember that we finished off with a conversation around hybrid amps and the benefits of tubes versus solid state to deliver voltage and current respectively. So I've started this part off with a question to Jason about power and how much power headphones really do need, and why so many headphone amps have power figures of 5 watts and 6 watts when we really only need milliwatts. So I'll step out of the way and we'll get into the interview with Jason Stoddard. Well, you touched on power then. I think this is a really, really important question I wanted to ask you. There's this common belief I see come up over and over and over again that we need to have 5 or 6 watts of power in an amplifier for it to be any good at driving headphones. And when you do the maths, almost all headphones I've ever looked at, with 1 or 2 exceptions, are going to use well less than 1 watt of power. Often it's a few hundred milliwatts of power to get to, say, 120 dB, which is your pain threshold. You might get an orchestral peak hitting that for a moment, but you don't want to be listening there at the whole time. So I'm just curious, what's your view on the how to phrase this? I guess what I'm looking for is when companies are putting out, whether it's you or anybody else, putting out these high wattage amplifiers, no doubt some of it is to meet the demands of the market who expect that. But I'm guessing there's also benefits in having that extra room, that extra headroom and power on tap. Can you talk us through, in, again, kind of lay people's terms, how much power is really needed and why are headphone amplifiers so insanely powerful compared to what's needed?
That's funny. We used to work with actually John Chen at Grado. He used to actually be a sumo distributor. And he reminded me, when I said, well, we have this like 4 watt, or plus, amp coming out. It was the original Lear. I'm like, I don't know, with Grados, they're super sensitive. I don't think that's such a great idea. And he's like, you forgot rule number 1 of audio. There can never be too much power. And he says, and then there's rule 2, which is there can never be too much power. And I have to add to that, as long as it's not at the expense of something else. If that power comes, at the expense of noise, or it's a horrible amp to use, ergonomically, or it's dangerous, then yeah, you don't want a lot of power. In most cases, though, we're seeking to maximize the amount of power that we can get out of an amp because there's no downside to it. It's better to have it and not need it. Because you'd be shocked at how many people literally they get a Magni Heresy or Magni 3 Plus, which they're rated at 2.4 watts, and depending on the model you get, it's really more like 2.8 to 3.3 at 1%. So you're talking about, say, about a 3 watt headphone amp into 32 ohms, which is completely bonkers. You'd be amazed how many people say this is not enough power. And then you actually look at what they're listening to. And if you're talking electronic music, essentially with a lot of bass content, into difficult loads. I mean, there's some planers out there that are 13 ohms. There's some that are 8. There's a lot that are 32 and down. The 30s and 20s. It's amazing how close you can actually get to the output limit of that amp. And we actually get people who go and they'll get an Asgard, or they'll get a Lear or something, and they'll be perfectly happy after that. It's like, oh, that's plenty of power. I'm good. And I didn't believe it myself until I literally started doing some testing and said, "Oh, okay, let's take a Loki, which is our little equalizer. Let's put some EDM through it. Let's crank the bass knob all the way up because, you know, you want to do that, right? We got 12 dB, in the bass at 20 hertz, and since it's electronic, it will have 20 hertz. It might have 10 hertz. It might have, but it will actually have a lot of low frequency content. And I mean, you can literally get to clipping on a magnet, and it's not at ear bleeding levels. It's very, very loud, but it's not at the point where it's physical pain because you actually have the bass cranked up so much, you're not really hearing the treble. So I always figure best to have the power and not need it.
Mm.
And that's why we have really silly things like the Ragnarok, which is like 24 watts into 32 ohms or something like that. I mean, it's completely ridiculous.
Mm.
But that amp, you start to see the drawbacks because at that power level, you might actually hear some noise on IEMs. You might hear some noise on very sensitive headphones. Whereas, our other stuff, you're not going to really run into that, especially at low gain. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is manage trade-offs and give you as much power as we can. We're about at the limit of Magni Modi, I believe. The Magni Heresy. I think we're about at the limit of what we can do with the current wall wart. And I don't think people would be really thrilled about having a wall wart that's literally 3 times, the size of the product. I'm not joking. I mean, they do make bigger ones. No, we're good. I don't know how we package it. And second, it's like, as soon as you see that, you're like, oh, this thing's going back. That's crazy.
And actually, that's a good point, because one of the first things I noticed with the Heresy was the sheer size of the wall wart next to the Heresy, which, again, for me, it doesn't matter. It's plugged in under the desk. I don't even see it. But I was looking at it going, okay, this is interesting. I've never seen this sort of contrast before, where the wall wart's probably as big and as heavy as the amplifier itself, if not bigger and heavier.
Well, here's the scary thing. They get even bigger. Yeah. So we could go up, up a round or two, but it's like, no, let's just not. It's starting to get ridiculous at that point.
I just want to quickly jump in here and explain something. If people are using headphones with no EQ applied, then what I said at the beginning of this section holds true, which is that most headphones don't require that much power compared to what's available on tap. What gets interesting though is if people do start applying EQ. And so I wanted to clarify something. If you raise an EQ band, let's say you raise your 80 Hertz band by 3 decibels, you're asking the amplifier to produce twice as much power in those frequencies. So you can imagine that very quickly, if someone's producing, say, 6 decibels extra in the EQ to boost up the bass, they're suddenly requiring a lot more power output from the amplifier. What that means for us then is that we need to be clear about how we're going to be using our systems. Personally, I don't ever use EQs. I like to find headphones and devices that have the sound quality that I enjoy, and then enjoy them for the characteristics they bring. That's not to make those that like using EQ wrong. I completely understand the need and the desire for some people to do that. But what it does mean for us as consumers is you need to think ahead about how you're going to use your system when you're deciding how much power you need. If you have a pair of headphones with moderate power requirements, let's say you've got a pair of HiFi and Sundaras, they're not the most sensitive headphone and therefore do require a little bit of juice to drive. Nothing crazy, but a little bit. However, if you then say, you know what, I wish these had more bass, and you start boosting the bass frequencies in your EQ, you can very quickly start to stretch the limits of the amplifier. So if you're someone that likes to EQ or think you might like to EQ in the future, that says to me you need to think about buying more powerful headphone amplifiers. If you're somebody more like me who just wants a system to deliver the music purely bit perfect from beginning to end with no EQ and no adjustment of the sound, then you probably don't need to worry about amplifier power so much, because pretty much every amplifier on the market will drive pretty much every headphone on the market. So I just want to put that into context. There's no hard and fast rule here. Every headphone and amplifier is a little bit different, and so it all depends on the combinations you're putting together, what does and does not work. As Jason said, the best thing you can do is look at the specs and find the specs closest to your headphone and then see how much headroom, that is more power than you need, how much of that you have available.
Just on the power thing, and you mentioned that the ability to clip with the bass on the lower impedance loads. I think a lot of people think that a higher impedance load like an HD800 or Bayer T1 is actually more difficult. But you've mentioned a couple of times now that the current draw seems to be more the challenge than the voltage availability. Is that the case? Am I hearing that right?
Depends on the product. We're trying to do both because you're right. If it's 300 or 600 ohms, you want lots of voltage. And something like a Magni 3 will run, plus minus 16, 15, 16 volts, so about 30 volts, peak, into a high impedance load like 300 ohm headphone. A Lear could do 60 to 100, which is, again, completely and utterly bonkers. But yes, you need for a high impedance headphone, you need lots of volts. So if you have a headphone amp that's running at plus or minus 5 volt rails, like a full of 3, it can swing maximum 10 volts. It's going to be at a disadvantage there. Where if it has a lot of current behind it, you're not even going to notice if you have a 13 ohm headphone plugged into that. So it's all trade-offs. The Fulla and the Hell are kind of special in that they have switching power supplies. So we're kind of limited in what we can get out of a USB output. So those actually have lower limits than all of our other stuff, which is linear. And the bigger, that's one of the things. The more money you throw at it, the bigger linear supply you end up getting, and and the better it ends up being able to drive all headphones because we optimize for voltage and current. It's like an Asgard 3 will swing, I think plus minus, it'll actually swing about 40 volts rather than 30 into a high impedance load. So you get more power out of it. But that's the thing is like people are monumentally confused about all this impedance stuff. And I have to explain to speaker amp manufacturers a lot of times. It's like, guys, you have like 8 ohm speakers and 4 ohm speakers, and some of them, dip down into 2 or 3 ohms, at places. I said, we have 600 ohm headphones and we have 8 ohm headphones. That's a different ball game.
How does a consumer identify because obviously everything's quoted in watts or milliwatts for power output. So as a consumer, when you're looking online, is there any way we can work out whether this is going to have lots of voltage and or lots of current depending on the specific headphones we're using?
You'd have to look at the power output at each specific impedance level. If you have a 300 ohm headphone, for example, and you have an amp that puts out 30 milliwatts, it's not a lot. If you have an amp that puts out 1 watt at 300 ohms, that thing's completely insane, has lots and lots of voltage to play with. The other one doesn't. If you have a 32 ohm headphone or a 16 ohm headphone, then you better look down there and see what kind of wattage it will drive, because it really depends on where you're at. Now, the problem is I know a lot of people have 300 ohm headphones and 20 ohm headphones. So, what do you do there? And that's why most of the amps we do are either solid state or hybrid, because they can bridge that gap better than, say, a pure tube amp that's not transformer coupled. If you're a transformer coupled tube amp, you could do both as well. It's just we don't know anything about them, so I can't comment on that.
Yeah, cool. No, that's really helpful. Thanks, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
We're getting a bit close to time, so let me see if there's any other gold that I want to ask. Okay, one of the questions I had, and this might be a short answer because you may not be able to say yet. You've touched on it, and that makes me think maybe you're not ready to say, or there's no plans yet. Someone asked, is there a new modular product coming to replace the Jotunheim?
The short answer is there's always something. No.
Okay.
You really think Apple isn't working on the iPhone 13 and 14 right now?
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, I mean, Jotunheim's a great product. It's been a really good product for us. And it would be interesting to see what we could do better. If we could get Nexus in there, that'd be great. If we get continuity in there, that would be wonderful, but I think that's a big ask. And like I said, having a switch for the preamp outputs, because a lot of people actually use Jotunheim with headphones and powered monitors. And they're like, oh my God, I literally have to unplug the powered monitors to turn them off. I'm like, yeah, okay.
That's me.
Yeah, that is a problem. I get it. So yeah, we'll put a switch on the front so you can do that. But the timeline, like I said, anything you can do by the end of the year. But I can't really say any timelines. It's so ridiculous right now. We have literally a board of 23 projects, and like 5 of them are like, well, these are ready for production. I have no idea when they're going to hit. But those were the products we figured we'd get out this year. And, who knows? Maybe 1, maybe 2, maybe none. Don't know.
Yep. Wait and see.
But fair enough. It's like, I think everyone will understand why we don't want to talk in detail about future plans.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's fair. And I think any company trying to make plans at the moment with any definitive timelines is probably kidding themselves. So no, that's fair. I want to try and sneak in one more question if we can.
Sure.
This is about balanced and single-ended for their own inherent merits. And so I'll try and set this up properly and make sure I get this clear. If we had 2 identical amplifiers, perfectly implemented single-ended, perfectly implemented balanced, both have, say, equivalent power capabilities or sufficient power capabilities. So we're having level playing field, and the only difference is one is single-ended and one is balanced. So let's say you're feeding it from a DAC that's got perfect equivalent output, single-ended and balanced, feeding into the 2 amplifiers. Is there any for home setup where we're not dealing with huge long cable runs and lots of noise, like in a recording studio, for instance? Is there any inherent benefit in running balanced if all else is equal?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because a lot of people are like, I want balanced, I want everything balanced. And it's like, it's probably better to understand the pluses and minuses of balanced before you say that. And balanced, of course, will be more expensive. It is more parts, no matter, how you count them. It's not necessarily twice the parts, but it's different topology. It's more complex. Balanced will typically, and here's a surprising one. Balanced will typically have twice the noise floor of a single-ended design, because both sides are active. And you're like, wait a minute. Okay, so balanced should be quieter because it cancels, common mode on the cables. Yeah, it does. But the inherent noise floor of a balanced amp will be 6 dB higher than a single-ended amp. That's why you got to work a little harder to get the thermal noise, down on a balanced amp. On the other hand, any kind of hum, AC hum that you get that's caused by bleed through on the power supplies, that'll cancel out on a balanced amp. So you may end up with kind of a wash. You may not hear any of that, but you'll see like a flatter noise floor, but that's at a higher level. There are trade-offs and everything, and I usually always kind of go back to the coward's response of like, hey, you should probably get what you like. Sounds what actually sounds the best to you, because insisting on only balanced or only single-ended is maybe the wrong answer, because they both have their strengths. I can definitely do a quieter single-ended amp than a balanced amp. And that's why if you actually look at, phono preamps, you'll see a lot of them are discrete, because discrete can be quieter than IC. A lot of them are single-ended and very simple single-ended, like, 1 or 2 devices, because you want, less, basically less devices, less noise in general, or you'll have a whole bunch of devices paralleled up to get the equivalent source resistance down and to lower the noise. So that's why you'll see kind of a certain approach to phono preamps that is single-ended, very simple, maybe massively parallel, but that's to get the noise floor down, because when you're talking 40, 60, or even 80 dB a gain, noise is all that matters. When you're talking a headphone amp that might have 0 dB, 6 dB, 14 dB. Maybe some of them might be 18 or 20 dB again. It's less important. You're probably not going to hear the difference in noise floor, but it will be higher. But then again, you lose the hum component. So which one do you want? We try to get the best results with either of them, and we try to make sure that everything's below the perceptual level. And beyond that, it's like, which one do you like to listen to?
Makes sense. And so what I'm taking from that is people shouldn't buy balanced just because it's balanced. They should buy the product that suits them, regardless of whether it's single-ended or balanced.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things about balanced is it adds a little more complexity to the market. And balanced kind of started making its way across from pro into high end in the early 90s when I was at Sumo. And they had, we started adding balanced connectors. And, for a long time, I'm like, they must absolutely be balanced 100%. There's no question about that. And it's like, and now it's more shades of gray. I have really enjoyed a lot of our single-ended stuff, and I've really enjoyed a lot of our balanced stuff. And some of our single-ended stuff measures better than our balanced stuff. So it's like, it's not as black and white as you'd like it to be.
Yep. No, that's great. I think the more we recognize that it's not black and white, the more it opens up the ability to come back and just go, what do I like the sound of? Listen to that. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah, and I'll be the first person to say I like X, Y, and Z out of our products, but I'm not going to say those are absolutely the things you must buy.
Yeah, because it's personal taste, isn't it?
Yep.
Fantastic. I've taken more than enough of your time, and I have a page job that I need to go and do. So, Jason, once again, really appreciate you taking the time today to share some insights from the industry and the market, and some wisdom and some answers with the viewers. I'm sure they'll appreciate it as well. I hope things continue to tick along in this strange world that we're currently living in, and I know there'll be lots of people out there waiting for whatever new products may or may not be able to arrive this year.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, like I said, everything seems to be going okay here. The problem is, of course, there's a lot of businesses that are actually impacted, a lot of people that are impacted, and it makes me feel a little guilty that we're like, yeah, it's okay, things are good, but we can just keep on doing what we're doing.
I think that's probably the best thing we can all do at the moment, is just whilst we're not impacted, obviously, if anyone is, that's dreadful, but whilst we're not, is just to keep on rolling forward as best we can and keep the world moving.
Yeah, and we will get through this. I know. It's like I'm looking forward to going back to the local breweries when we can actually do it. Until then, I have my cans I get from them, and think about the days when literally, we used to literally almost every day, go out to the local brewery and talk about stuff, which resulted in, us creating new products like the Hell and the Full of Three. Those actually came from just a wacky conversation of like, hey, why don't we do something for gaming? Yeah. And we don't have that anymore. It's a small complaint, when you consider, go out and you might die, but so.
But no, it's those little things that we miss, and hopefully we'll all get back to them soon.
I hope so. I don't care if I wear a mask or be outdoors or whatever. I'm good.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks again, Jason. Really appreciate it, and I look forward to speaking to you and potentially Mike in the future for some more questions, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah, and we're gonna actually be doing. We do our own little thing now every month where we at least stream a little thing from the shitter where I talk, either I babble about things, or eventually we'll get Mike and Dave and Ivana and stuff on that.
Where can people see that? I haven't come across that yet. So where do people find that?
I believe that's on our Facebook page. It's also on YouTube. It's on our YouTube channel. So
Fantastic.
We archive it. Yeah.
I'll grab some links and put them down in the description when I release this, so people can jump on board, and I'll certainly be adding to your viewer base. That's for sure.
Cool. Yeah, we've done a grand total of 1 so far. So
That's good. We can still get in early. That's good.
Yeah, and we do have plans for next month, so we'll see. It's a lot of fun. I mean, I like talking about things. If you give me a chance to have a beer or a glass of wine, I'll talk about anything forever, as you probably figured out.
That's great. The more we share knowledge in this industry, the more people get to enjoy more stuff. So that's great.
Cool. That was good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
You too. Thanks so much, Jason.
That's it for my interview with Jason Stoddard from Schiit Audio. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it interesting. I'm definitely planning to do another one in the future, hopefully with Jason and either Mike Moffat or one of the other people involved in designing DACs at Schiit. So we can talk about things like multi-bit and their approach to DAC design in a bit more detail. If there's any other interviews you'd like me to look into, please drop me a comment down below. I'm always excited to try and get hold of various industry experts and have a chat to them. One that I know I have coming up is a conversation with one of AudioFly's pro designers of IEMs to talk about what goes into tuning and selecting the various components of IEMs to get the finished sound quality. So if there's any questions you'd like me to ask in that interview, drop them down below. If there's any other interviews you'd like, drop those down below as well. For now though, happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.